Welcome to Grace Stories. This is Garrett from Grace Community Church. We are glad that you're watching or listening, wherever that may be, on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. This week, I have Aaron Hightower, Dr. Aaron Hightower with me, and I am super excited that we get to talk a little bit. There are a lot of things that I've been wanting to hear him talk about, especially in the midst of some of the things that are going on. But the first thing I kind of wanted to ask you, Aaron, is what made you want to work in the medical field in the first place? I mean, if we can go to the beginning, what inspired you to do that?
Perfect. So everybody always wants to have that profound answer, like, I heard a voice from heaven, or I saved a puppy when I was a child. Actually, I went to college and just wanted to do science, and they told me pre-med was a lot of science. so that's really how I got into pre-medicine. But as I got further into following doctors around in undergraduate, or seeing what life as a medical provider could be in expressing my faith in a real world setting and serving people. I started to get really excited about what I could do if I did become a doctor. And so that falling into medicine was kind of how it happened. But I was really fortunate that I fell into a calling that God had intended for my life. And so I moved through the normal steps of undergraduate and then getting into medical school and going through training. And that led me down the path to where I am today, which is I'm a family practice obstetrician. So family practice, I take care of newborns, babies, kids, adults, seniors, kind of everything in between. Obstetrician, also do deliveries. I take care of, do prenatal care and take care of women and do deliveries as well. Which is funny because when I started medical school, the two things I said I didn't want to do were primary care, like family practice, and obstetrics, which is delivering babies. I thought those were the two things that I absolutely did not want to do. And it's funny sometimes how God has a different plan for us than we have for ourselves.
Yeah.
So
when you were going through that process, were there any, challenges or obstacles? Did you ever kind of stop and think, maybe I should go back and try something different, or, oh no, what have I gotten myself into? Were there any second thoughts ever, or did it ever feel like you're just like, I know exactly what I want to do, it's clear as day?
So, it is a really grueling process. Medical school is trying the hours, the study in the books, the tests, and then leading into the clinical years of medical school, which are long hours at hospitals, learning underneath residents and doctors in training and attending doctors. And so medical school in itself is a grueling process of constantly being tested and judged against your peers. And that can be a really disheartening thing to be, to feel that every step is being watched and judged and graded, because it is. And so those years were difficult from that aspect, the time spent, the always competing, the always feeling the need to work harder and do better to be the best. And that takes a toll on a lot of people, the people going through it. My wife at the time, we had a child at the end of medical school. So, that process being difficult not only on me, but on my wife and on my family. Even just that's just the 4 years of medical school. And then moving on into residency, which is even more grueling from a learning standpoint and a time spent at the hospital and the learning what it is to be a doctor and the practical aspects of taking care of patients, whether it's in the clinic or the hospital setting or delivering babies. So with training through the 3 years of residency, I took that stress to a whole new level. And that was difficult too, because we uprooted. We moved from Oklahoma to Kansas, to a place where we didn't have family. We didn't know anybody. It was a new city and a new job. And, the stress of that combined with increased workload. So that sounds like a lot of negative stuff, but just like other areas of our life, when we go through struggle and challenges and suffering, God uses that sometimes more profoundly than our good times. And so there's a lot of great things to be said for the challenges that my wife and I went through, and then our family went through in residency. A lot of great friendships and a lot of great support that we felt through those difficult times, and a lot of great blessings that we saw God give us. And so that's a really long way of saying, yeah, there were a lot of challenges and a lot of times where it felt like going back and doing something different or choosing a different path would have been easier, but there's also a whole lot of blessings that we've seen through the challenges that I'd hate to give up just to go back.
Yeah. So thinking about that and, all of the time that you have to invest and so much of yourself that you have to pour into that, are there moments where you can see clearly, or you're thinking to yourself that I can see God, working in this, experience, or, in this aspect of my job that makes it, more of a calling than just a 9 to 5 where I go get a paycheck. Are there moments where, talking about the blessing, that you really see God working in some of those things that you're going through?
Yeah, absolutely. So, one reason that I'm profoundly glad that I fell into medicine is the way that my personality and my desire for relationships and desire for connecting with people, the way that can allow me to live my faith out in my profession. And so, as a family practice doctor, I have patients all across the age scale in different phases of life, and being able to be there in relationship with those patients through some of their most wonderful times and through some of their hardest times, it's just a great way to really connect with them as a person, as a human, not just as a doctor or as a, someone that they're paying, but as a human, and in a way that I can share my love for them. We're called as Christians to love others and love God, to glorify God in what we do, whether it's in our home or our family or our community or our work. And the fact that I can do that just by living in relationship with these people and sharing my heart with them and loving them through good times and bad times is really rewarding.
Yeah. So you're going through medical school, and then you do your residency. What ended up bringing you to Bartlesville, Oklahoma? What was that process like? Not only maybe professionally, but with your family, and looking back, how has that transition been for you?
Right. So, that was my response when someone said Bartlesville. It was Bartlesville. So little backstory for me. I'm from Oklahoma, Tulsa area, but moved around Oklahoma a lot as a kid. So really we claim Southern Oklahoma, which we still have family in Southern Oklahoma and Oklahoma City. And so Bartlesville, Oklahoma, north of Tulsa, not any closer to family, not any closer to home, didn't really seem like the right choice, except for it was where God was opening doors for us. And so I was looking for a small community where, as a family practice doctor, I could do deliveries, do prenatal care, do C-sections, because that's a passion of mine, is the obstetrics. And so while there were other places in the state that were closer to family and were closer to home, God's plans a lot of times don't factor in what we think should happen. And so we saw doors closed in places where, from man's understanding shouldn't have been closed. And we saw doors opening here. And we're so glad that they did, because we love Bartlesville. We love the people. We love the community. We love our church. Again, through a challenge of moving to a new place, not close to family, having to build community again, seeing God bless us in those ways again as we've been here now 4 years. That's it's amazing to see how God blesses us in ways that we don't realize at the time.
Yeah, and working in as a family practice doctor, and then working with the hospital here, how has that experience been for you, since you've moved here, and have things, changed or evolved over time? And being in that kind of role, does it end up taking away, time, or, the things you wish you could have more, I wish I could be home more, or I wish I had more time to do this, because you talk about, Bartlesville is a smaller community, and I can imagine that there are some things, if you're specializing in something that, there might not be a lot of people doing, X, Y, or Z at a hospital. And so, having to maybe go on call or be on call to do different things, what has that been like for your family? Yeah.
So, when I first moved here, I did start as a family practice doctor that was doing deliveries in the hospital, but also I was taking care of my own patients in the hospital. So the first 2 years of being here, I was on call at times for deliveries. At other times I was on call for hospital admissions. And at other times I was on call for the clinic. So after hours calls and things like that. And so just being stretched in so many ways, and so many days being, having to be reserved as these are call days. I know that I'm going to get calls from the hospital, or I'm going to have to go in, was really challenging the first few years that we were here. Part of that stress and strain on family led to I did stop doing the hospital medicine. I stopped taking care of my own patients in the hospital, except for the obstetrics, the deliveries. And so, as you, with any profession, you see over the course of career how things evolve and change. I didn't really want to give up hospital medicine, but looking back, how much stress and strain that was on the family to be on call, the demands of the hospital for doing the inpatient medicine really was harder on my family, especially. Hard on me, yes, but I could see the effect that it had on my family after the fact, once I stopped doing the hospital medicine. And so that was kind of a blessing in disguise to lose something that I enjoyed doing and something that was important to me early in my career. But to be able to say that it made a positive impact on my family to stop that part of my career is reinforcing that was a right choice.
Yeah.
Now I do continue to do deliveries, which, as you know, babies do what they want to. They come at all hours of the night. They show up whenever they think it's time to, not necessarily when I think it is. And that's always going to be a tension on the family. I'm fortunate to have some great partners in my practice that do help share the burden of call, and that's been another blessing, is having good partners that I get along with, but also do life with, and that's been a helpful thing as well.
Yeah, that thinking about a lot of that, it is interesting to see how God can, shape different things, or make you see things that you didn't see before. And so, it's really great to think about, like, looking back and something that you're going through, and then realize, that may have been good for me, but it maybe wasn't great for other people. And to realize that you don't need to be doing, too much or stretching yourself too much. Do you ever sometimes feel, though, like, being someone that has, a certain level of expertise? I mean, obviously, more so than me, but then maybe even more so than other people that, will be working. Do you ever feel, this pull to, sometimes overextend yourself, or I have to be there because I've got to do this. I've got to help people, and how do you balance that, if there is any tension with that?
Yeah. There's a real challenge in being a physician and feeling an obligation to your patients, and not in a negative way at all, but feeling drawn to be there for them, to go the extra mile, to want to do everything I can in my power to make them better, or reassure them, or be there for them in times where they need someone present. And whether that's, late night calls from a concerned parent, or going to the hospital to meet a family that can't feel their baby moving anymore. And the tension there is that my heart absolutely always wants to be there for my patients, but I also have a family at home who I love dearly, and time with them that I wouldn't trade for anything else in the world. And so there's that pull between two great loves, or two great passions in my life, that it really is a difficult thing to navigate sometimes. And so I think anyone who has responsibilities like that affect other people, but also as a part of a calling or something that you feel is a part of who you are, can be drawn between two good things, and that's difficult. But
yeah, there are plenty of times where I'm at my house, and obviously the I guess the significance may be different, because nothing I deal with is ever, going to be, life or death in a way. But, you still get those texts from people. If I get texts from people at the church, and I feel like I got to respond, but then I have to think, no, right now they can wait an hour or whatever. And, given the situation, and sometimes it's, you got to get in the car and go. And sometimes it's, I got to stop and think about, the people at home, and what they're going through, and what I mean to them. And so I can imagine it being even harder whenever, you're thinking about someone's personal well-being and their health and those sorts of things. When one thing that, if you don't mind sharing, what what are some of the emotions that you deal with if you're working with a patient and you've done everything that you can, but there's nothing left for you to do. And you kind of, you really can't go anywhere else, and you have to have hard conversations. What is that like?
That's where you start to really lean on the relationship aspect of being a physician or being a medical provider, is that, patients sometimes don't need to have an answer, but need to have someone that's there for them. Mm-hmm. And so that whether you're talking about an end of life discussion or a scary diagnosis or just the unknown of even something like the pandemic, mm-hmm. Sometimes just sharing with patients in their sorrow or in their fears or in their uncertainty can be very therapeutic, mm-hmm. Both for patients and for me as a physician. And sometimes that's crying with them in the clinic. Sometimes that's hurting for them after I get off the phone with them. A lot of times that's hugs in the office, except for the last 4 months. And so a lot of that is trying to convey love and care, mm-hmm. to the patients in difficult circumstances. And so that can be emotionally exhausting. It can be physically exhausting. But those are some of the most rewarding, mm-hmm. times in my career.
Yeah. I think some people, if they're thinking about medicine, they think, oh, well, the doctor's just here to fix me. I come in, I need something fixed, and that's their job. But I like the way that you talk about that, because it's much more than just, I'm going to try to fix someone, but there's I'm going to be present, yep. with someone. And sometimes that may look like, prescribing something, mm-hmm. or doing something, but there's instances where you can't, and it's just as important to be with someone emotionally or physically in a way that can still convey love and compassion. And I think that probably has meant a lot to a lot of people, mm-hmm. who maybe haven't gotten that experience everywhere with every single doctor out there, because everyone's going to be coming at it from a different worldview, or a different perspective, different personalities. Yeah.
I'd say that I learned a lot of what I do as a physician from my parents growing up, because a lot of what I do as a physician is loving relationships, trying to connect with people, meeting people's needs where I can, which sometimes is medical needs and sometimes is emotional needs or other. And so my father growing up was a police officer, but he reached people, whether it was people he was helping on the side of the road or coworkers or people that he locked up last week. He would reach people where they were because he treated them with respect. He loved them. And once he got through to them with love and respect, he could then talk about his faith. He could talk about why he treated everybody the same, why he loved people, why he cared. And so I remember one particular time we stopped at a convenience store and Dad bought cigarettes. Dad didn't smoke. And I was really confused for why he was picking up cigarettes. And it was because one of the guys that he'd put in jail the night before was really struggling, didn't have any cigarettes. And he pointed out to me that, there are things that we can do for people to reach them in ways that they wouldn't expect us to. And whenever people see that kind of care, that kind of service, they get curious about where that comes from. And so that opened a lot of doors for him in a unique field to be able to reach people. And I like being able to do that as a physician too, to have a patient come into the office because we have to talk about their blood pressure, but to realize a few minutes in that they're really struggling with something else that they, and be able to not just push them off and, make another appointment. We'll talk about that next time. To be able to meet some needs in an immediate sense, whether that's talking with them or hugging them or even praying for them. Those are ways that whenever I emphasize the relationship aspect of being a doctor, can really open some doors for me to show my faith to those that I'm serving.
Yeah. I think too often people, when they are Christians and they have a job that's not at a church or not in some kind of nonprofit or religious institution, whatever, they can wrongly think, well, I talk about my faith at church or in a small group or X, Y, or Z, but I don't. I hang that at the door whenever I go to work, and that doesn't really intersect my job. But I think if we're called to follow Christ and we're letting him and we're allowing the Spirit to work through us and in us and shape us and make us more like Christ, then we should be showing people a way to operate day to day, minute by minute, that's different than what other people are doing. And it should make people curious. What makes them tick? What makes them do things that way? And to care and love and be present in a way that other people might not be, because there's nothing that's shaping them or driving them that would kind of help drive the way that they interact with the people they work with.
Everything is spiritual. We live in a temporary world, but the things we do here echo into eternity. The lives that we touch here, we can be used by the Spirit to make differences in the lives of the people around us, and because of that, in the generations beyond us. And so I may be a physician, but my faith is really who I am. My faith should come through in who I am as a father, and my faith should come through in who I am as a husband, and my faith should come through in who I am as a physician too. And that really goes for everybody, and who you are or where you are. God has you there for a purpose in your home and in your community and in your church and in this world. He's got a purpose for us as Christians to glorify him by loving others and loving him and bringing glory to him in what we do. And so, as a physician, and really as anyone who has some worldly authority or man-made authority, I have to be careful that I don't use my faith underneath man-given authority. So I'm your doctor, listen to my spiel about the Bible, but that I do so under the Spirit's authority. And so that's why loving relationships and meeting needs can lead to the Spirit being able to speak through me to my patients without it feeling like my doctor's prescribing religion for me.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So if we could pivot a little bit and talk about some of the things that have happened recently and some of the ways that a lot of the recent events with the pandemic and different things has affected the way that you've had to operate, and has maybe even challenged you. What did it look like early on when the pandemic hit for you in just day-to-day practice?
Yeah. So practically, early on, seeing reports out of China and Italy and overseas was disheartening and scary. Mostly scary in the sense of what's going to happen next here. We had early on a lot of reassurance that there were ways to keep things from happening, and there were ways to prevent spread, and the hope that things here weren't going to look like things there. But even from early on, that fear of the unknown with a pandemic and a virus that may be related to other viruses we've seen, but acts different than what we've seen before. Physicians are scientists. We learn from studying and from testing and repeating tests to prove that what we know is true. And that's not something that happens rapidly generally. And so with a pandemic that moved quickly and with such high stakes, loss of life and threat to economies and hospital systems and marginalized people, we didn't have the privilege of taking the time to learn and understand quickly. And so there was a lot of fear of the unknown, not sure what do we do? How do we advise patients? How do we take care of our patients and our families and keep everyone safe? And so what that looked like from health systems was things like shutting down clinics to minimal operations, doing telephone visits instead of in-person visits, turning over into doing video visits over the computer with patients who could do video visits. The hospital setting changed a lot, limiting visitors, very strict screening for workers and for patients. There was just a lot of precautions being taken in the clinic and the hospital to prevent as much as we knew about it, which was that people could spread it without being sick. When you did get sick, you had fever, cough, and shortness of breath. So we would ask everybody those same three questions constantly. And then other things that changed about the work was what kind of protective equipment we used whenever we were in the hospital setting. That's putting barriers between you and your patient. That's masks, and that's gowns, and sometimes ventilated hoods that kept you from breathing the same air as patients. And all of that happened rapidly, just like as quickly as it could, to limit spread as much as we could, as we continued to try to learn more about, were the things that we were doing necessary? Were they beneficial? Which is a really hard thing to explain to people, that we may not be certain that we're doing the right things, but we have to do something. And so that for me, that was very difficult to not be able to have patients come into the clinic and me hug their neck and see how they're doing. That was really difficult for me to, with my elderly patients that could not figure out doing computer visits, to not be able to actually see them and try to figure out what was going on with them over the phone. Or so I think similar to what everyone has gone through, not just medical providers, is that loss of interaction, that loss of being able to see someone, have that connection with someone face to face, was difficult. It was difficult emotionally. It was difficult professionally. It was hard to do. Life was not normal. And so it made for a lot of a lot of difficult decisions in my clinic and in my hospital and in my family. And so it's been a really difficult thing to change everything about a practice because of out of fear and out of trying to do what's right for keeping people safe.
Yeah. So, you're trying to, do things in a different way, and you're having to shift some things. And for some people, it's easier. There's been such a surge of, technology use and different things like that. There's a lot of those common threads that, like we had to learn how to do different things and pray over the phone and communicate more virtually than we were used to doing before. A lot of businesses had to learn how to do things like that. But thinking about the other side of it, when you're done with work and you come home, what was it like, going in, not having the luxury of staying home, not because of, anything else, but just the need of being a doctor, having to go into work and then come home. What was it like for you and your family?
So, the first week that things really started shutting down, and the hospital and the office started taking more precautions. I was actually on vacation that week. We didn't go anywhere because things were starting to get crazy. So I was just at home with the family, which was great. But I did actually get called in for a delivery late that week, and it hit me suddenly that I was gonna have to go to the hospital with all of this going on. I was gonna have to do a delivery in with following different protocols and wearing different protective equipment, and worry about the shoes I wore into the delivery or the scrubs that I was wearing while I was in the hospital. Did I need to change out of those before I left the hospital? Should I take a shower at the hospital and then put on new clothes? Should I strip off in the garage and leave the dirty clothes in the garage? And so that still some of that fear of the unknown of how do I keep my family safe when I'm having to work, when I'm having to be potentially exposed to people with coronavirus. And that's just me as a delivering physician, not working with the sick people in the ICU that have coronavirus, not the people that were working hard in the respiratory clinic to take care of anyone who had coughs, colds, fevers. That was me strictly just walking into labor and delivery, meeting a new baby, and walking out. And so I did start, that was probably the earliest indication to me that this was going to be something different that I've never been through before. I'm not a worrier. I'm not a fearful person. I'm not someone who sits up late at night worrying about the what ifs. But I did with this. I worried about, am I doing the right thing for my patients? Am I doing the right thing for my family? And over the course of the weeks, as reports came in of, worse things happening, like the epidemic in New York, and how the hospital systems were affected on the coast, and some of those anxieties continued to well up in me, and this was a new thing for me to be anxious or worried about things. And I started realizing that I was spending hours researching, which doctors do, but time with family, I was on physician blogs and reading new research and reading numbers and statistics and reports, and it just hit me. It was the trusting in myself to provide my own safety, trusting in my own, if I can learn about it enough, or if I can read about it enough, then I can lean on my own understanding. And that really hit me that we're called to not be fearful. We're called to be courageous. We're called to be to lean not on our own understanding. We're called to trust in the Lord with all our heart. And so it was then that I started asking friends and family and people around me to pray for me for peace, for being a good steward of my health and the health of my patients and the precautions, and being a good lifelong learner as a physician, but also to trust in the Lord with all my heart, to be anxious for nothing, to go to Him and in prayer seek peace that goes beyond understanding. And so that was this was a new experience for me, for those verses to be real to me, because it really was the first time that I had to ask God to lead me away from fear, to lead me away from anxiety. There's still parts of me that worry about, because we still don't know. There's a lot, even as physicians, that we don't know. Obviously, as public health and epidemiologists and politicians and everybody tries to make the right decisions for us as a city and state and nation and world. All of the unknowns can still be so anxiety provoking and fear provoking, but just leaning back on that perfect love casts out fear, and that even when we don't know what's going on around us, that we know that God is in control. And that really, as Christians, is one of our greatest blessings, is that we know that God's in control.
When all of this started, and you're doing your own research, and there are people who have devoted their lives to understanding things like this, did you, just being a doctor, get a lot of people asking you questions, or your own patients maybe asking you, maybe they're expecting, and it's asking, well, what am I supposed to expect? So there's different layers of maybe, you're going into these situations, or you're encountering these questions, and you're thinking, some of these I know how to answer, but then there's a lot of these I don't know. What was that like for all the different ranges of questions and emotions people dealt with?
Nonstop questions. I tell people that, so as we started to close down and do more virtual visits and more phone visits, the number of visits I did in a day probably cut in half. But I was probably doing 4 times the work, with phone calls from patients asking, do I need to be seen? Am I at high risk? What do we need to do? We were going to go out of state. Should we do that? So the fear and anxiety that I was feeling as a physician, I could see that in my patients, and in the number of calls and messages and questions that we got. And so, that was, anywhere from the patients who were convinced that it was a Chinese conspiracy, or people who knew that the government made this to get rid of people, all the way to people who really had just no idea what question to ask, but were afraid. And so you're right, not having all the answers in those times was not always reassuring to patients. But trying to lovingly reassure that doing the best things that we can at the time is sometimes as good as we can do. And so, got a lot of questions. I did a lot of, social media, Facebooking, and trying to, get people to look to trusted sources for information. And we all know how things can get out of control on social media sometimes. But so doing my best to try to keep myself and my friends and my family informed, as well as patients, just to the best of our ability. So.
Yeah. And I appreciate, in some of the things that you've said, being honest in saying that I don't have all the answers, and there's not going to be a lot of people out there that have all the answers, and it doesn't matter what camp they sit in or what they believe, but we're all going through this together. And it's all something that we're dealing with in different ways, and we have our own emotions and thoughts about it. But to just stop and think, how can I, be diligent, but also faithful in God. And I think some people think, well, if God's called me not to be fearful, then I don't need to listen to these things, or I should just forge ahead and throw caution to the wind, sort of a thing. And I appreciate you kind of alluding to being mindful and taking the time to do research and think about it, but to also trust that ultimately, when everything's said and done, God's still in control, and He's still got His hand in all of these different things. For you, were there any experiences that you had, whether it was through deliveries or different things like that, that were just wildly different, that you would have never thought in a million years I'd be having to do this, and maybe having to do a lot of those phone visits and virtual video conference things were some of that. But were there any other things? I mean, my brother and sister-in-law, they just had a baby, and so for them there were a lot of things that they expected, and a lot of things that they got to do with their first kid that they weren't able to do. So what was that like from that perspective?
Yeah. So, there's the difficulties of, you're right, for like new parents who this is usually a joyous time of, can't wait. Everybody's in the waiting room, excited to meet the baby too. And, family coming in from all over to meet kiddo for the first time. And then there being, hospital, limitations on, only having one person in the room with you, or, patients having to make the decision on, well, I really wanted my mom and my husband in the room, or, families having to make those decisions that, are difficult decisions. It's hard to coach patients through that. And so that's difficult, in that those are things people shouldn't have to do if life were normal. There's things that medical school didn't get me ready for, that like, I would see patients in the parking garage to keep them from having to come into the clinic, because there's some things that need to be seen. Like, looking in a kiddo's ear, I can't do that over a computer. And so there were times where I was, going down to the parking lot to meet a family in their car so I could look in ears, and having my nurses doing shots in the parking lot, and so kids didn't get behind on vaccinations. And, there were just so many things about, our normal process being interrupted, that nobody was prepared for. There's no way to be prepared for. And some of those things are tragic, like, losing family members, but not being able to be in the hospital with them. Funerals where limitation on numbers or being close is put into place. Families making decisions to not come and see the new grandbaby for who knows how long because of the concerns and the fears. And some of those are, uniquely interesting things, like, interacting with my 90-year-old patient who figured out how to get on the computer and connect to my video visit when there's no way in the world I thought she could. And so, there's, even through all of the fears and some of the heartaches and some of the challenges, we've seen a lot of human resilience, whether that's in the medical field or just socially, how people have still been striving to connect with people, the people around them, the families, and the creative ways that people have found to continue to engage with people around them is a testament to who we are as human beings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So thinking a little bit about some of that and the way that we've all been stretched in different ways, do you feel like God has used this to shape the way that you thought about different things, or to even stretch your faith in certain ways and challenge you through the pandemic and some of the things that you've had to go through?
So it's really like anything, any challenges or suffering we go through, we can allow God to use those challenges and difficulties in our life to change us and change our heart and move us more towards Christ-likeness and grow through them. Or in how we respond to those things, we can allow the enemy to have a foothold in our lives that leads us towards bitterness and anger and resentment, and making those choices to see where God has used the challenges to shape your sometimes hard heart. It's difficult to see places that needed to be changed in myself and in my heart, but it's also a good reminder that in these types of challenges that God can still mold a hard heart.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that for a lot of people, they can look at something like this and think, I just want things to go back to the way they were, or I don't want to have to deal with this inconvenience or these challenges. And instead of thinking about how do I become better in spite of the things that are going on, it's just, what can I do to go back to the way things were? And maybe there are some things that, there are lots of things. I think once we return completely back to something that's normal, there's going to be a lot of things we can go back to where it's going to feel amazing. It's going to be great to be able to do that. There are other things I think that have changed, and that maybe some of those things needed to be changed, and some norms needed to be checked. But for you, thinking about the future and the fact that right now Oklahoma is reopened and back to normal in one sense, but not really. For you, how do you see your work and your practice and different things going forward, and what do you want for yourself and your patients and your family once the coronavirus is over with, or that it's not the same issue that it has been? What does that look like for you?
So yeah, you bring up a good point about going back to normal, is going back to how things used to be. Is that really what we want? Is that really what's right? And you're right, in a lot of ways, getting back to some of those normals is going to be nice and comforting and good in a lot of ways. But you're right, there are a lot of ways that we really should be moving on to a new normal, not back to how things were before. I think of in our family, instead of being busy 4 and 5 evenings of the week, with things being shut down, the amount of time spent together being in a slower pace has been refreshing. I think about in our families being able to connect over video chatting. All our family is at least a couple hours away, and so spending more time together over Skype and Zoom and all of those. It's been nice to have slowed down enough to have time to do that more, to connect more, even though we're at home more. In practice and in my office, being able to use some of our newfound skills to make life easier for patients. Some, hopefully continuing to be able to do some video visits on things that can be quick and easy for patients to do over a computer instead of always being in the office. In terms of like our church, there's been some great things that have come out of necessity, being able to engage in church online, being able to worship together, even if we're separate, has been wonderful for our family. In our small group, same, being able to connect over video conferencing has been some weeks just absolutely the highlight of our week, of being able to connect with those people that we love and do life with. And so, I think going forward to whatever our new normal is going to be, hopefully we don't forget that what we've always done is not always the best thing for us. So,
yeah, I like a lot of the examples that you use. It's a lot of them about utilizing the things that we have at our disposal to strengthen relationships that we wouldn't be able to normally, not knocking the ability that and the impact that you can have if you're with someone face to face, and the interaction that you can have there, but to say, oh, I can do that, but then also spend more time with people that I wouldn't be able to normally, or to be able to make things a little bit easier for a patient who, for them, getting out of the house and getting in their car and coming in might be a real struggle and a real challenge, and it doesn't always have to be that certain way. And I think for a lot of people, they're reevaluating different things, and I've heard stories about how some people, some large businesses have said, oh, we're going to be able to work from home, or have more employees work from home and do things and give opportunities to people who, it might be hard for them to get out of the house or make those commutes. And so it's something that is different, and obviously was something that a lot of people were forced to do, but it does give you the opportunity to stop and evaluate what's going on around you. So I think, one of the last things that I want to ask you before we finish is for people that are listening, regardless of, how they feel about the things that are going on right now, medically, and the situation that we're in, what would you say to anyone listening about the way they think about the things that are going on?
So, something that I've really tried to emphasize in discussing with people why we're doing the things that we're doing, whether it's social distancing or mask wearing or lockdowns or businesses being regulated. A lot of those focused around how do we protect the most at-risk people, the marginalized people, and how do we protect public health overall. And, I think probably for decades there will be debates and discussions and arguments about if things were done right, how negative impacts going on into for generations, or how things could have or should have or ought to have been done differently or more aggressively. But all of those discussions don't matter when we take a step back and talk about what we want to happen is we want to do as good a job as we can with the information we have in the moment to protect the most amount of people. And so at this point in time, with concerns of numbers rising, with concerns of talks of second waves, or what'll happen in fall and winter, or what will happen going forward, is that that us as individuals can affect other people and consider the well-being of others around us by allowing ourselves to put up with small inconveniences, things like not going places, or wearing masks if we do go places, or washing hands more frequently, even if you wouldn't normally wash your hands at that time, or trying to protect those around us that are at higher risk, people over the age of 65, people with medical conditions, people in nursing homes, or that are immunocompromised. And sometimes the only way we can do that is by constantly being vigilant, because we don't know all of the people around us whenever we're in public, or whenever we go to church, or whenever we go to the grocery store. And so there's something in the medical field called universal precautions, which is that people, providers, nurses, staff universally do things when they're doing procedures or interventions for patients, where they wash hands, wear gloves, wear masks, and we do it universally because we treat everybody as if they are at risk for having a harmful outcome if we don't do these things. And so considering some of these recommendations, even if you don't believe it, even if you think things are overblown, even if you think that, this impedes on my freedom, consider the universal precaution that this could keep someone else from getting sick. It could keep someone's grandma from catching this and ending up in a serious place. And it's hard to think about that outside of ourselves, how this may affect someone else's. But if you consider that if someone else is doing universal precautions for you, that may be protecting your grandmother, or your cousin that has cancer, or your kid who has asthma. So if we all look out for those around us that are more at risk and more in danger, and consider the well-being of others before our own personal freedoms or our own beliefs, then that is a way that we can be selfless in looking out for the well-being of others.
Yeah, during all of this, I've been, and maybe at times annoying to my own wife, because I tend to be I'm a normally hygienic person. So when this all hit, it ramped up tenfold, and I started disinfecting everything and washing my hands more, and started wearing masks in certain situations. And when I'm here with larger groups of people, I wear a mask. And I think there's been a lot of different things that have happened currently in our country, and some other things globally that has challenged certain people to think about what does it look like to be a good neighbor, and to think, maybe my neighbor is someone that I don't know, or I'm going to come in contact with that I didn't realize I came into contact with. And I think a lot of this has revealed different things about different people and their motives and the way that they think. But I like the way that you said that, and I think it's just a good challenge for any of us to, regardless of what we do, to at least stop and think, what is whatever I'm doing impacting? How is that impacting the people around me, and the people that I care for, but also the people that I don't even know, and would I want those people to do the same for me? And so it's a good challenge for any of us in any situation, I think, regardless of whether there's a pandemic, to stop and think, how do my actions impact others? So Aaron, I really appreciate you taking the time to come here and do this, and to come out of the house whenever you've got time away and talk with me a little bit. And for all of you that are still listening, I appreciate you taking the time to stop, watch this conversation, to listen to this conversation. If you're looking for more stuff that the church is doing, you can find us on our website, gccbartlesville.org. You can also find us on social media, Instagram and Facebook at gccbartlesville. If you're looking for more conversations like these, you can search for Grace Stories anywhere you listen to podcasts or on YouTube. You can also find all the links to all of that stuff on our website, gccbartlesville.org. Thank you again for listening and watching, and we will talk to you next week.